Our Lenten Lunchtime Lesson by Father Andrew of the Society of the Divine Compassion. Thursday after the first Sunday in Lent. The path of life. Thou shalt show me the path of life. In thy presence is the fullness of joy, and at thy right hand there is pleasure forevermore. Psalm 16, verse 12. The path of life is not necessarily dark and shadowed, for pain and sorrow could never be ends in themselves. Joy is one of the gifts of the Spirit, and as St. Francis said, a sad saint is a sorry saint. We must never allow ourselves to think that the right way is always the difficult way, but of course it may be. Shakespeare said, "The course of true love never did run smooth." All true love is tested by sacrifice, and there is no exception to this in the love of the soul for the soul's lover. The thing that is necessary is that we should be upon the right path. The question that we are to ask ourselves is, are my feet set upon the path of life? It does not matter, though, through what darkness and difficulty we may be going, if they are, for most surely we are on the road to the fullness of joy, which is everlasting. But if we have music and flowers about us now, and our feet are not on the path of life, we shall presently find out our mistake at the cost of darkness and disappointment, while we are learning to retrace our steps and get back to that path of life from which we were bribed by the pleasure or frightened by pain. In Africa, the scouts are called pathfinders. Anyone familiar with the African veldt knows how difficult it may be to find a path, how easy it is to lose one's way, and how one needs a guide. There may be many paths, for the natives always walk one behind the other in Indian file and make their different trails to their several dwelling places. If a missionary is called in a distant kraal, a boy will go for him and will lead him unerringly along the dim trail on his journey's end. God is the great pathfinder. Our prayer to him will be that he will lead us into the way of his will, and if it is simple and self-effacing, he will show us the path of life, though it may also be the path of pain. The experience of saints through the ages is that they have trusted God and looked away from themselves. He has shown them the path of life, and in their following they have found their peace. He who shows us the path is our companion in the way. The Christ who walked beside the disciples along the Emmaus road walks unseen beside us still. His presence with them in the way, all unknown to themselves, was their preparation for his self-revealing to them in the breaking of the bread. There are many joys in this life, and all true joy is God's gift. But the fullness of joy is his own presence. Sometimes in our prayer and in our communion, there may come to us an experience which can only be described by the words of the poet who wrote in this psalm, "In thy presence is the fullness of joy," in his own presence. Sometimes in our prayer and in our communion, there may come to us an experience which is only described in the words of the poet who wrote this psalm, how in the fullness, thy presence is the fullness of joy. How he is with us, we know not, but this we know, that we feel the comfort of his presence and the pressure of his hand. The Son of God, who for our sakes became the child of Mary and willed to be known on earth as the Son of Man, whose human life would be our example and the representative of us all, himself in his prayer sought the way of his Father's will. He was shown the path of life. It led him away from all earthly dwellings to the wilderness and back again to mingle with the multitude of men. Again, it led him to the mountain of prayer and down to the valley of Gethsemane, where the shadows of the olives made patterns in the moonlight as their Creator bowed beneath them in the agony of his prayer. It led him up the hill of Calvary, and there its course in this world ended, but it was his sure way to the right hand of God. His enemies thought it was the path of death, and that the end of his life was failure. We know now that the path of sacrifice which he trod was the one way which was wholly and completely in accordance with the will of God, and so the pathway of eternal life. Someone has written, the path of sorrow, that path alone, leads to the land where sorrow is unknown. To the martyr Stephen, in his present passion was granted the vision of the crucified Lord at the right hand of God, where there is pleasure forevermore.